Mr. Chair and Senators, on behalf of the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present to you our considerations with regard to C290. The clerk has copies of my presentation, and the two papers on which it is based have already been translated and distributed. The Institute of Marriage and Family Canada argues against the passing of Bill C290 for two reasons. First, gambling is profoundly damaging to the families and communities of problem gamblers. Government bears much or some of the cost of cleaning up the resulting messes. Second, provincial governments take almost a quarter of their profits from gambling addicts. Government is abusing its power when it relies on addicts to generate revenue. The Canadian Association for Mental Health defines problem gambling this way. Gambling is a problem when it gets in the way of work, school, or other activities, harms your mental or physical health, hurts you financially, damages your reputation, causes problems with your family or friends. First, gambling's effect on families. We know that in the families of gambling addicts, problem gamblers, there are far too many innocent victims. A study of children of problem gamblers by Philip Derbyshire of the University of South Australia heard three siblings describe an episode, quote, when their mother was trying to leave to gamble as one of her younger children struggled to wrest the suitcase from her grasp to make her stay. A 2008 study published in the Journal of Gambling Studies found that violence between spouses was significantly higher in their sample of problem gamblers than in the general population. A 2008 study in Norway found that families of problem gamblers experienced family conflict at a rate more than 50 times higher than the general population. In a 2011 Alberta study, Dr. Robert William of the University of Lethbridge found that roughly 6% of gamblers account for 75% of all the money spent on gambling in that province. A 2009 study found that an estimated 3.2% of Canadian adults have a moderate to severe gambling habit. This is comparable to the number of Canadians 25 and older who are frequent heavy drinkers. More importantly, we know that problem gamblers deeply affect those around them. An Australian study estimated that one problem gambler can affect 5 to 10 people. This would translate to roughly between 4 and 8 million Canadians. Provincial governments are themselves addicted to gambling revenues. Ontario is undergoing a massive plan to modernize the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, OLG. The government wants to use this plan to raise OLG profits by $1.3 billion annually by 2017. We know that BC, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes have all expanded or are about to expand into online gambling. Ontario's Finance Minister, Dwight Duncan, stated publicly that this move is, quote, about the competitiveness of OLG going forward and, I stress this, ensuring that it continues to be a reliable source of revenue for the province. Simply put, when provincial governments are short on cash, they turn to gambling to line their pockets, and the House always wins. We are also witnessing an enormous conflict of interest here. Governments claim to be concerned about gambling addiction and even spend some money to address it, but no government will make a serious effort to help problem gamblers quit when their profits depend on those same gamblers. Remember that in Alberta, 6% of gamblers account for 75% of all money spent on gambling. C290 further expands gambling. In fact, by expanding it to individual sports events, it expands it greatly across the country. And it is, frankly, giving families of gambling addicts another reason to fear that things are only going to get worse. In closing, the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada cannot support C290 because problem gamblers and their families will suffer more as gambling expands. Our governments pay to deal with the resulting problems. Add to that the fact that provincial governments addicted to these very revenues cannot be trusted with this expansion. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And we do have people wishing to put questions. I have already on the list Senators Runciman, Baker, Boisvenu, Jaffer, McIntyre, and Frum. So, beginning with Senator Runciman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I don't have a lot of questions, but I did want to think, Mr. Chung, you mentioned about suicides, gambling-related suicides on the rise, and I was looking at the Ontario statistics, and we'll just take 2008, 8 deaths where there was gambling involvement, 2009, 5, 2010, 6, 2011, 4. So where do you arrive at the conclusion that they're rapidly on the rise?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. That came from a report that the Ontario Coroner did in 2011. It was an analysis of the period between 1998 and 2010, and it was titled Suicides Gambling, and it was produced by le Ministère ontarien de la Sécurité communautaire des services correctionnels. Sorry, I don't have the English ministry title in front of me, and that's where that statistic came from.
Okay, well, I don't have the complete report, but I do have the chart, which, from that report, which certainly doesn't indicate, a rapid rise in deaths related to gambling involvement. But in any event, we had witnesses yesterday. I don't know if you're aware of the witnesses who appeared before yesterday, and their view was that defeat of this bill is not going to have the impact you have indicated you'd like to see it have, and they felt on the other side of the coin that passage of this legislation is not going to have any impact in terms of encouraging new folks to get involved in single event sports betting who are not already engaging in that activity through the internet and through other channels. You've taken a different view on this, and I wonder how you arrive at that conclusion that people who are already engaged in this activity, and the fact that simply by the fact of putting it into a regulated and transparent environment is going to encourage more people to get involved. What do you base that conclusion on?
Well, thank you for the question. I guess I'd say two things in response to that point of view. The first is that when there are violations of the law because of offshore activity, I think the law should be enforced rather than to decriminalize those aspects of the law, and I think that's the approach that the government's taken that the Parliament of Canada has taken on a wide variety of issues as they relate to prostitution or as it relates to, for example, the issue of marijuana. Many people have advocated for decriminalizing those activities as a way to deal with the fact that they take place. But I think, as a conservative, many people argue that we should, in fact, force the law and put more resources into law enforcement. The second point I would make to that is that the OLG itself, the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation itself, has said that this bill is single-event sport betting, if permitted in Canada, will lead to an increase in revenues. In fact, it was reported in the Toronto Star on March 2nd, 2012, that the OLG estimates that Windsor alone would see an increase in revenues of about $70 million annually as a result of allowing single-event sport betting.
And I think most of that was projected to come from the United States. If you take a look at that report, and you mentioned prostitution and drugs, and I think there's a clear distinction here that gambling is legal and widely available through legal means. I guess I'm having difficulty with the positions that both of you are taking. I understand your concerns about gaming, and we heard similar concerns about that yesterday in terms of proximity. Some of the new facilities at Ontario, so-called modernization, which is a cash grab essentially. But in terms of this legislation having an impact with respect to increased numbers of people engaging in single event sports, I have yet to hear a persuasive argument that makes that case, and I'm afraid I'm not hearing one from you today. Thank you.
Senator Runciman. Senator Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And First of all, I'd like to congratulate both of the presenters for their very excellent presentations, and also to congratulate Mr. Chong for his presentation here today. Mr. Chung, people watching this proceeding and listening to you would be struck with your first sentence. Because, you know, in elementary school we learned that we elect members of Parliament to go to the House of Commons to vote on the laws that we pass, and they have a chance to vote at second reading, and then at report stage from committee, and then at third reading. But I'm just going to read back for you what you said, and then ask you if you could explain it in some detail why this is so. And here's what you said. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee, this is the Senate committee, to register, I'm adding that, the Senate committee, to register my opposition to Bill C-290. As elected members of Parliament, we're not given the opportunity to formally vote on this important piece of legislation, end of quote. And I wonder if you could explain to us how that is possible, that you as an elected member, here's a major change to the Criminal Code of Canada, and you said that you were not given, any elected members of Parliament were not given an opportunity to formally vote on this important piece of legislation.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair, to the Honourable Senator. He will know that as having himself been a long-time member of the House of Commons, that from time to time bills are passed through the House of Commons on unanimous consent at all stages, and so that's what happened in this case. That does happen from time to time, as he will know, and I'm sure as he observed when he sat in the lower chamber.
Yes, I was there for 29 years. And was this one of these bills that there was a motion made, it's deemed to have been done, or did it happen on a Friday morning, or at a time when there were very few people in the House to get it through? Was that what happened here?
Well, I think if you look at the transcripts of Hansard, the bill was adopted at all stages at report stage on March 2nd, Friday, March 2nd, and I assume that was an agreement of either an agreement of the House leaders or as a result of debate collapsing.
Debate collapsing. In other words, it was one of these instances. So you didn't have an opportunity as a member of Parliament to vote on this legislation?
No, I did not, and that's why I very much appreciate the opportunity to express my views here and to go on the record.
Well, you can be assured that every senator will be given an opportunity to vote on this legislation. Thank you very much.
Just a supplementary, was there a committee study of this bill?
There was.
So it was after report stage that you did the...
That's right.
Yeah, this is a process that we don't have in the Senate, and it always fascinates us to learn about it. Senator Boisvenu, suivi par le Senator Jaffer.
Senator Boisvenu, followed by Senator Jaffer. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions to put you. The first to Mr. Miedema. When I read your presentation, and I'm attempting to make an overall assessment here in relation to gambling, I would say that your organization has adopted a general position, namely that you are opposed to any type of gambling or betting, because of the fact that this does represent a risk. This is an overall approach that you've adopted, I gather?
And which you'll find in Government Gambling's Biggest Addict paper, is that there's an inherent conflict of interest, more importantly. More important than gambling being legal is an inherent conflict of interest. Okay. And where you have a profit motive competing with care for addicted gamblers, profit wins and addicted gamblers lose.
So it's like selling cigarettes or booze or...
I wouldn't say it's exactly like that. I think in this case we have. I found it interesting that we have very clearly stated by previous witnesses that if this bill passes, the government would be taking over from bookies, and it also puts the government then in the position of being bookies. But in this particular issue, it is an inherent conflict of interest, and problem gamblers and their families are always going to lose because profit will always win. We see that with the expansion of the OLG looking to get another $1.3 billion annually. It's not an issue of gambling being legal, it's an issue of this conflict of interest, and that needs to be remedied.
You might say that the same thing for cigarettes. The government does say that it's a dangerous product, but at the same time they're also pocketing billions of dollars in taxes. This is another example of contradiction then. Mr. Chong, yesterday we heard from very interesting witnesses who talked to us about the effects of gambling and betting and compulsive gamblers. But they say that there has been a decrease. These are people that work with compulsive gamblers who say that there has been a decline in the number of people that have this type of pathological behavior when it comes to gambling. Because it seems to me that we are attempting to consider solutions to complex problems where there's illegal gambling, and in this particular instance it results in a significant transfer of money outside the country. And according to these people, it is easier to trace compulsive gamblers when it is a legal activity rather than an illegal activity. The question that I put you, if you were a senator and you had a decision to make, do we maintain the status quo when it comes to this activity, knowing that money will leave the country and that organized crime stands to profit? And we have difficulty identifying compulsive gamblers because this is an underground activity, or should we rather make this lawful? And our ability then to identify compulsive gamblers would become easier. And these three specialists who deal with compulsive gambling say that it's better to make the activity lawful from this point of view. So there seems to me that there's a type of contradiction. I'd like you to explain to me how you square this. You say that this will create greater danger, whereas the people who treat these compulsive gamblers say that it would be better for us to legalize the activity and have a better grasp of what is taking place. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Senator Boisvenu, for his question. And I say at the outset that I favor the status quo. I'm not talking about abolishing all the types of legal gambling that do exist in Canada, but I think that when it comes to illegal gambling, what is presently illegal, then the government should maintain its position. Both provincial and federal government should work together to devote resources to combating such types of illegal activity.
Offshore gambling is to enforce the law and to ensure that governments work together to enforce that law. It's no different than offshore tax havens. For many years, both U.S. and Canadian governments kind of ignored the problem of offshore tax havens in places like Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and the like. And when the problem became too big to ignore, governments of both countries have acted expeditiously and have put the mechanisms in place to enforce tax collection. In terms of the negative social impacts, it is true, as Senator Runciman has pointed out, that on the tables that the Chief Coroner for Ontario has reported that the number of suicides has declined in the last 2 to 3 years. But I would point out two things. That first of all, the collection of these statistics is not entirely reliable. Many provinces don't collect the statistics at all. And in other cases, families of those involved are not willing to come forward to admit as to what happened. And the impact is much broader than just suicides. So I think we should put additional resources in place to help those families and those individuals with compulsive personalities. And as Mr. Miedema has pointed out, that is taking place, but not to the extent that it should.
Very short, but what I found a compelling argument in favor of this bill for Canada was the fact that the specialists who deal with compulsive gamblers were telling us that the situation will get worse or it will still remain just as difficult in identifying all the type of underground illegal activity, and so they are saying that it's better to legalize it to have a better understanding of what is happening. So it's in relation to this I'm interested.
I would put to you that if you were to legalize single event sport betting in Canada, that these kinds of issues that you've referred to about the underground activity are not going to go away. They're still going to remain. Often the offshore gambling industry provides a much better odds than do domestic players, which are run by provincial governments and that have certain standards and obligations that they have to uphold. So, I'm not sure that's going to deal with that very issue, and I'm not sure I agree with the premise that bringing it above ground is going to solve the problem.
Merci. Madame la Présidente.
Merci, Senator Bourgneuf. Senator Jaffer.
Thank you very much for both your presentations. I have a very short question. All the research you've done, have you found that immigrant communities, newcomers to our country, are more affected by gambling? Have you got any research on it, or have you seen any findings on it?
I have not.
I have not seen formal research, but I have heard anecdotally from people like Ncaa, who is the head of Success, Vancouver's largest immigrant integration organization, which integrates Chinese immigrants from both mainland China and elsewhere into the Vancouver Lower Mainland. It's one of the largest immigrant organizations in British Columbia. He's told me that this is a huge problem in the Asian community in the Vancouver Lower Mainland, and he and others in the community are quite concerned about the emphasis on increasing revenues through these sources.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McIntyre.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. My question is addressed to Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, I would like to raise the issue of constitutional jurisdiction with you. This is an issue that you have raised in your letter dated March 15, 2012 and addressed to the Senate. Provincial jurisdiction over the issue of gambling as opposed to federal jurisdiction on the issue of gambling as it relates to the criminal code. So my question is, what forms of gambling, according to you, will be subject to restrictions in the criminal code?
So I understand the question. What forms of gambling should be restricted in the criminal code?
Yes, you did raise this in your letter.
I think all forms of gambling that are currently restricted by the criminal code should remain as such. It's sections 197 through to sections 209 are sections of the criminal code that restrict certain types of gambling in Canada. Other forms of gambling are legal in Canada because they're not contained in the criminal code. I believe that all these sections should remain as such.
So this is really what you were referring to in your letter addressed to the Senate?
That's right. Look, I'm a realist. I'm not a utopian. I understand that gambling revenues form an integral part of overall government revenues in Canada. And I also understand that people want to spend their leisure and entertainment dollars at these facilities. And that's the reality in Canada today. So I'm not advocating that we further restrict or roll back the legalization of gambling in Canada. So I'm simply suggesting that we not expand gambling in Canada, that the current restrictions in the criminal code remain in place, and for the reasons that I outlined in my opening statement.
Thank you.
Merci, Senator McIntyre. Senator Frum, followed by Senator White.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question along similar lines. We did hear, we were presented today with the original agreement from 1985 between the provinces and the federal government. And as Senator Baker noticed in this original agreement, to change this agreement you need unanimous consent of the provinces. We know that there are 4 provinces, including our own province of Ontario, that is very eager to see this legislation go through, but are you aware of any provinces that have expressed an opinion, a negative opinion about this? And do you think the unanimous consent matters?
I'm not aware of any other provinces that expressed a negative opinion about this bill. But I would add that, I think the agreements that were struck in the 1980s and should be respected. And if that, consent is required, it should go ahead. But I also believe that, we as a federal government shouldn't simply abdicate our responsibility for federal jurisdiction for the criminal code. If all 10 provinces were to tell us that they wanted to eliminate sections 167 through to section 209 in the criminal code in one fell swoop, I think as federal parliamentarians we should resist that effort, even though there may be agreements in place at the executive level to see that happen. So I think we have a responsibility as well as federal parliamentarians to look at the impact that a bill like this would have on Canadians.
On another topic, you mentioned the negative impact on the NHL, the NBA, NFL, MLB, Ncaa, which all operate in Canada. They all had to have a position against this bill. They're very clear about that. The fact that potentially, this bill overrides that we're allowing betting on the very games that they're offering. Can you talk about what you think the potential fallout from that will be?
Yes, I can. We all know that the NFL has expressed interest in a franchise in Toronto. We also know that exhibition games have. The NFL has always expressed interest in exhibition games in Canada. Those are at risk, I believe. Those are at risk if single-event sport betting were to be allowed in Canada. I'd also note that this isn't just hypothetical. Just 2 days ago, on October 16th, 2012, in the New York Times, the Ncaa announced it was pulling 6 championships from the state of New Jersey for the very reason that the state has just allowed single-event sport betting. Governor Christie there pushed this initiative, and as soon as that was passed into law by the state, the Ncaa pulled those championships. The Ncaa also has a Canadian university as part of its membership. Simon Fraser University is a member of the Ncaa. The University of British Columbia has applied in the past. Right now it's not a member, but it's indicated that at some future date it may decide to enter into the Ncaa. So this is not just an issue for professional sports, it's also an issue for amateur sports in Canada.
And I mean, for NHL expansion teams, which has been a big topic in Canada, any sense of the impact there?
Yes, the 4 major professional sports leagues in the United States have all cooperated together to oppose any expansion or any initiatives as it relates to single-event sport betting. In fact, the case went to the Supreme Court of the United States, and in May of 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States upheld the plaintiff's case, which was a case that was titled Markle v. the Officer of Commissioner of Baseball. The other major sport leagues supported the MLB in their efforts here and indicated that they were going to side with the 4 major sports leagues, professional sports leagues, and ensure that single-event sport betting would not be allowed in the state of Delaware.
Do I have very quick? Yep. Okay. Well, it's just that, we have this interesting sort of dichotomy between the positions of Major League Sport and all the testimony we've received saying the betting's going on anyway, that the position of the sports are irrational or they're in denial because they're trying to suppress activity that is going on regardless, so that their position is out of date, anachronistic, and futile. What do you say to that? Well,
I agree with the 4 major professional sports leagues in the United States, the NFL, the NBA, MLB, and the NHL, when they say that allowing for single-event sport betting would undermine public confidence in sporting events and would undermine the image of professional and collegiate athletes. We all know that there have been betting scandals on games. This betting was illegal. And we all know the impact that has on the confidence that fans and spectators have for professional sports.
Okay, thank you, Senator From. Senator White.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the commentary on the Ncaa. I think it is an important aspect of this. A question actually for Mr. Miedema. Yesterday we had we had evidence from, I would argue, health professionals, I guess, talking about gambling addiction. And I'm always trying to weigh the evidence of individuals or organizations as to whether or not they have a value in the discussion, I guess, a successful or a failure of the discussion. Do you know if the province of Ontario, or more specifically, I guess maybe even OLG, has suggested there will be an increased funding to organizations such as that should the single sport betting or 290 be passed?
I'm not aware of that. I do know that OLG is very proud of the fact that they spend $40 million, but they bring in $2 billion in profits. That's a
So you haven't heard a suggestion that it would be increased to $60 million?
I haven't, no.
Successful. Mr. Chung?
Do
you know of any suggestion of an increased funding for health professionals?
I do not, but I do know that there's a sense amongst the professionals that I talk to, social workers, people who deal with problem gambling, that there aren't adequate resources in place to deal with this problem. I think we have to understand as well that this problem, the negative social impacts of gambling are often unseen and unheard. I can tell you that there are members of our caucus that have been very directly impacted by these kinds of issues, and it's not something that is easy to admit or that is easy to talk about, because there's a shame that comes along with it. And so often this is a problem that goes unseen and unheard. But I think when you talk to social workers and people who deal with these problems directly, they will tell you that there aren't adequate resources in place to combat problem gambling.
Madam Chair, is it possible for us to ask the witnesses yesterday whether or not they had received any or had any discussions previously with the province of Ontario about getting increased funding prior to their giving evidence yesterday? I'm just trying to see whether or not they were awful supportive of something I was surprised they would be supportive of, I guess. Is that something we could typically do, or?
We could forward that question to them, yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, John.
I have a question for Mr. Miedema. This statistic that roughly 6% of gamblers account for 75% of all the money spent on gambling in Alberta.
Yes.
That was from a 2011 study. That's quite a jolting statistic. So I have a couple of questions. First, are you aware of anything that would make Alberta different, or would you expect the same result in other provinces?
Well, I can't extrapolate that specific result. I'm confident that results will be similar in other provinces.
Okay. Now, Alberta is a rich province. It's, I suppose, conceivable that that huge amount of money coming from a few people is coming from a few multi-millionaires who just like to spend some of their money on gambling.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any indication what number or what proportion of that 6% who bring in all the lovely money would be problem gamblers, as distinct from just wealthy, very wealthy people?
I appreciate the question. The same study found that the top 6% of the highest spenders, so this is not the same 6% I quote in my brief, but the top 6% of the highest spenders have a prevalence of problem gambling 13 to 20 times higher than the general population.
Okay, so the likelihood is that there is a significant proportion of the original 6% there who would be problem gamblers.
I think that'd be a safe assumption, yes.
So are you suggesting to us that the provinces are reaping all these lovely profits, not just from gambling, but from problem gamblers? That if the problem gamblers went away, the provinces would be a lot poorer?
Yes, I am. Early in my brief, about a quarter of gambling revenues come from problem gamblers. And this is where I come to the belief that provincial governments have no real vested interest in dealing with this problem because their revenues depend. If the OLG's revenues drop 25% from one year to the next, that would be a crisis for the government. And so they have no vested interest to deal with this problem.
So what do we do? Seriously, I mean, this is getting at questions that have been raised by a number of colleagues. Gambling is out there. It's actually happening.
Yes.
And with the arrival of the Internet is even easier, even more prevalent. You're addressing a serious moral issue here, and I'm not quite sure what the appropriate public policy stance is at this point. We could put a whole lot more money into support for problem gamblers and prevention and all that, but would that really work? Does it work?
It's not a guarantee. I'm not qualified to say that it works. I don't think there's any panacea or any simple solution to this problem. I think there's 2 points. Again, that conflict of interest, and somehow in provincial regulations, we need the provincial gambling organizations to separate the profit motive from care for and prevention of addiction. I'm not aware of particularly how they should do that, but I would think the best way to do it would be to either remove it completely from the purview of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, and ensure that they set aside a set percentage or a set amount, hopefully a set percentage of gambling revenue, so that as revenue increased, that funding would increase. The other thing we have to deal with is the fact that provincial governments are relying on this revenue. And it's an easy way to increase revenue because people don't decry an expansion of gambling in the same way they do a raising of taxes, for example. Or cutting of services. So one of the recommendations that I make in this paper about gambling's biggest addict is that, focusing on Ontario, take all of the profits from gambling, put them towards paying down the deficit, and take away the profit motive for governments except where they would have an increased zeal to pay down debt. Take it out of general revenue and use it for that purpose alone. And then I think we would have a chance, at least, of addressing the reliance on the revenue, while also, with separating it out from the lottery corporations, have a chance to ensure that the problem of problem gambling would receive the attention and the resources that it deserves.
Thank you very much. Second round, Senator Runciman.
Well, I like that idea. Having a revenue dedicated to the deficit. I mean, right now, and we see it in Ontario, it's this major expansion of gaming and the whole issue of proximity and putting these new casinos in the center of major urban centers. The whole idea is, in terms of, I'm strongly on side with respect to that, is going to increase the whole issue in terms of problem gambling. With respect to the bill before us, it's now legal to bet on 2 events. Although pro-line is 3, but the law allows 2. And so this is moving it to 1. And I have yet to be convinced by any witness that this is going to have an impact on increasing the number of problem gamblers. In fact, the testimony we've heard from witnesses yesterday and last week was not simply on the other side of that coin, and felt that this wasn't going to have a significant impact. And listen, I had testimony here from Professor Daravinsky, if I can find it, from McGill, has been studying. He's an international expert on this, and it's really tying up what Senator Boisvenu said, that we haven't seen any dramatic or any increase in pathological gambling rates internationally with the significant expansion of legalized gambling. But he also talked about this issue with respect to single event sports betting being widely practiced now, and then bringing it into a legal regulated environment will provide, and I'm going to quote him here, a somewhat safer product. So I guess, I understand your concerns, and I'm certainly concerned about what Ontario is doing. But in terms of this particular issue, I don't see it having the impact you're suggesting it will have. So.
Okay.
Is there a question?
Well, unless they can provide something that will persuade me, I'm sticking to my guns.
The question is, can you persuade me otherwise?
Well, if I could, Madam Chair, answer the Honourable Senator, my colleague, I would say two things in response to that. I'd say there's clearly a correlation between the massive expansion of gambling in the last 20, 30 years in Canada and the increase in social problems. Now, whether or not those social problems have somewhat diminished in the last 2 to 3 years, there's no doubt that the overall trend remains in place, which is that with the increase fivefold of gambling revenues from $3 billion to $14 billion from 1992 to 2011, there's been a corresponding increase in adverse social effects. That's clear. It may fluctuate from year to year, but it's clear that there has been a commensurate increase in adverse social effects. Now, is that increase tailing off and remaining constant? It could be, but nevertheless, there are adverse social effects. And so, logically, if we expand gambling by allowing for single event sport betting, we're going to see a corresponding increase in social problems. So, I believe in the do no harm principle. I think that, we should not add to adverse social effects by expanding this activity, not to mention, the whole raft of other reasons that have to do with professional and amateur sports, that have to do with the fact that it does not create good employment, and that it's a very inefficient way for governments to raise revenues. Very inefficient.
If I may. Two questions here that I see. One is the question of, will this expansion increase the number of problem gamblers? The second is, given the percentages I've just quoted, if that percentage remains even relatively constant, is the expansion of gambling going to further soak problem gamblers and their families? Because I want to be clear here, I'm not only talking about the 3.2% of Canadians, I'm talking about their spouses, their children, their co-workers, their neighbors. Talking about families who lose their homes, about kids who don't have enough food in the refrigerator, or can't go to summer camp, or all sorts of, when money goes to gambling, it can't go elsewhere, basically. And so this is a much broader issue than just the 3.2%. And I would be confident, although I would have to continue to track this, that as expansion goes forward, it would give problem gamblers at the very least more opportunity to spend more money out of their family's budget.
Well, we had evidence to the contrary yesterday that problem gamblers are going to find a place to do it in any event, so I don't think there was any indication that it's going to increase in terms of the volumes of dollars flowing. Problem gamblers are going to find a place to place their bets, and again, we're going in one lane, and it's going to move over to a regulated, transparent lane, and so there's no indication that any solid testimony that we've heard that's going to indicate to persuade me and that this is going to increase the problems.
I think that was a repetition of the same question, so to speak.
It was worth repeating.
The last question will come from Senator White.
Thank you very much. Just my understanding is, and I guess I'm trying to see whether or not either of you have an opinion on it, my understanding is that easier access to gambling and growth in access to gambling will increase the amount of money people gamble. And I think the suggestion out of Alberta is a perfect one. And Madam Chair talks about how rich they are. I'm sure they still would love to reduce their gambling problem. So are you suggesting as well that by making a form of gambling or a piece of the gambling pie, single sport betting, more accessible, and we hear the OLG saying they want to increase revenues, that we will be taking the same amount of money spent by a family today, and I guess specifically to you, and we may actually more of it going toward a problem gambling issue instead of being spent in other areas?
That's a very real possibility, and I'll acknowledge firsthand that I don't have data for the future, obviously, but we need to be very, very clear that the current reality is that families are suffering financially, emotionally, and physically because of problem gambling. The OLG is expanding because they want to raise profits by $1.3 billion annually, and that money has to come from somewhere. Some of it will come from people who know how to budget and gamble for fun. A good chunk of it is going to come out of the pockets of those families.
Because the same people you talk about as a small group of people who spend a large amount of money already, they will spend a larger amount of money. Is that correct? Possibly.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I owe an apology to Senator Baker, who actually
Accepted.
had asked for a spot on the second round, and we're into overtime, but...
Very briefly, Madam Chair. There are 38 words that will be eliminated from the criminal code if this bill passes. 38 words. We've been talking about, before the committee, only 5 words. The 5 words we've been talking about are on a single sport event. And then there's a list of other things separated by the conjunction or. Have either of the witnesses given consideration to the effect of this bill as it relates to all of these other subjects included in this bill that would be eliminated? For example, to give you an example, give you a start on it. The words any race could be the presidential race, could be the election of Mr. Chong in the next election campaign. It's a race. No, but without qualifying words there, it opens up great possibilities. Have you looked at the other words in the section other than a single sporting event? Do you have any opinion on it?
To answer the question, I have looked at the section in question, but I think the overwhelming concern is the betting as it relates to single event events.
We're not concerned about elections.
No, I'm not.
No, okay.
Whether that's whether that's in the professional sports arena or whether that's in amateur sport or whether that's in the horse racing industry, I think that there are a variety of reasons why we should act very cautiously before going down this path.
Like Mr. Chong, I'm concerned, I accept the status quo, I'm concerned for any expansion. Certainly, individual sports events are one aspect, but the other aspects in the part that would be struck from the criminal code speak of even further expansion.
Yes.
And they speak of even further expansion into, I don't know if we'd say more accessible events, or events that reach farther and farther and farther into the lives of individuals. If they can, we can already bet on horse racing, of course, but if it becomes, I don't know, a UFC event in Toronto, if it becomes hockey games, baseball games,
Olympics,
junior hockey games, Olympics, that just, it's a small bill that would lead to a huge expansion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Baker, and I apologize for having missed your name on my list before that. Gentlemen, thank you both very much. A very interesting session, very helpful to us in our work. Colleagues, we suspend for 2 minutes to allow these witnesses to leave the table and the next witnesses to come forward.